The CEO noticed that his pregnant employee was moonlighting at a gas station at night. The next day, he did something that changed her life. Subscribe and tell us in the comments what city you're watching this video from. The city never truly slept. Even after midnight, the streets of downtown remained alive with the occasional hum of engines, the flicker of neon signs, and the rhythmic beat of footsteps against the pavement. The headquarters of Titan Energy stood tall among the surrounding buildings, its glass facade reflecting the dim glow of the streetlights. Inside, on the uppermost floor, Eric Lee remained at his desk, long after most executives had left for the evening. The habit of working late had followed him from his early years as a struggling entrepreneur, long before Titan Energy became a dominant force in the industry. Even now, as one of the wealthiest men in the country, he found solace in these quiet hours, where reports, projections, and expansion strategies formed a predictable rhythm. But tonight, his focus drifted. From his office window, he had a direct view of the gas station located at the base of the building. It was a standard Titan Energy station, brightly lit, impeccably clean, and efficiently run. Employees moved with practiced precision, refueling cars, restocking shelves, and handling the occasional late-night customer. His eyes scanned the station absently until they landed on a figure that struck a chord of familiarity. At first, he wasn't sure what caught his attention. The woman behind the counter wore the standard uniform of a Titan Energy station attendant. Dark blue polo, black slacks, but there was something about her posture, the sharp efficiency of her movements, that seemed oddly recognizable. He watched as she processed a transaction, her hands moving swiftly across the register, then stepped away to assist an older man struggling with a fuel pump. Eric frowned, trying to place her face. He had an exceptional memory for names, an ability honed from years of business dealings, but he couldn't immediately recall her from past interactions. Yet something told him he had seen her before. Curious, he left his office and took the elevator down. The night air was cool, and the streets were quieter than usual. As he approached the station, he observed her more closely. She had a calm, composed expression, despite the fatigue visible beneath her eyes. Her hair was neatly pulled back, and even after hours of work, she maintained an air of quiet diligence. Then, as she turned to grab a stack of receipts from the counter, recognition struck. Andrea Carter. Eric had seen her that very morning in the Titan Energy office, seated 2 floors below his own. She was a data specialist in the analytics department. He had glanced at her briefly during a routine office walkthrough, never giving her much thought beyond noting that she was another diligent employee in a sea of cubicles. But now, here she was, working the night shift at a gas station owned by the very company she worked for during the day. He took a step back, observing her with renewed interest. What circumstances led a full-time corporate employee to take on a grueling night job? Was her salary not enough? Did she have debts? A sick family member? The questions nagged at him, and for the first time in a long while, Eric Lee found himself genuinely unsettled by what he saw. The next morning, before heading into his scheduled meetings, he made a call to Titan Energy's internal HR department. The request was simple: pull up Andrea Carter's employee records and performance reviews. By lunchtime, the file was sitting on his desk. She had been with Titan Energy for 4 years. No disciplinary actions, no complaints, consistently strong performance reviews. And yet, despite her tenure and commendable track record, she had never received a promotion. Her salary had only increased marginally through standard cost of living adjustments. Multiple applications for advancement had been denied, with vague justifications about limited leadership experience and insufficient management exposure. Eric leaned back in his chair, tapping a pen against the desk. He had long suspected that Titan Energy had structural issues in its promotion pipeline, but seeing it laid out so clearly in a single employee's record made it uncomfortably real. If Andrea had been a poor performer, the stagnation might have made sense. But her evaluations were solid, more than solid. She had even mentored newer employees, yet those same individuals had surpassed her in rank within a year. A pattern began to emerge. He pulled additional reports, cross-referencing promotion trends across the company. It didn't take long to confirm what he feared. Women, particularly women of color, advanced at a slower rate than their white or male counterparts, even when their performance was equal or superior. Their salaries remained lower, their opportunities fewer. And now, one of them, Andrea, was working herself to exhaustion, forced to take a second job just to make ends meet. That evening, as he left the office, he found himself walking toward the gas station once more. This time, he observed from a distance. He noted the way Andrea handled difficult customers with patience, the way she moved with efficiency despite the strain of long hours. At one point, during a brief lull in customers, she stepped outside and sat on the small bench near the station entrance. She pulled out her phone and checked something, perhaps a bank balance, perhaps a medical reminder. Whatever it was, her face betrayed a flicker of exhaustion, her shoulders slumping just slightly before she straightened again. Eric stayed until her shift ended. She left at dawn, walking slowly toward the bus stop. By the time he returned to his penthouse, an idea had begun to take shape. Andrea Carter wasn't just an overworked employee. She was evidence of a deeper problem, one that couldn't be ignored, and he intended to find out just how deep it went. Eric Lee had spent most of his career believing in meritocracy. He had built Titan Energy on the principle that talent and hard work should be the only measures of success. But as he sat in his office, sifting through the data he had personally requested, he was forced to confront an unsettling truth. His company was failing its own people. Andrea Carter's employee file lay open before him, surrounded by other reports he had pulled from the Human Resources database. The more he read, the more patterns emerged, revealing systemic inequities that he had not previously noticed, or perhaps had not wanted to see. Her history at Titan Energy was straightforward on the surface. Hired 4 years ago as a data specialist, she had consistently ranked in the top tier of her department in performance reviews. Colleagues described her as detail-oriented, proactive, and dependable. Supervisors noted her ability to problem-solve under pressure, and newer employees had mentioned her willingness to mentor and train them. Yet, despite her qualifications, she had never been promoted. Each time she applied for an advancement, the rejection was couched in vague corporate language, limited leadership experience, not the right timing, more senior candidates in consideration. These reasons, when viewed individually, might have seemed reasonable. But when Eric expanded his search to other employees, the trend became undeniable. Across the company, men, particularly white men, advanced at a significantly faster rate than women and employees of color. Performance scores among female employees were, on average, equal to or better than their male counterparts, but they were consistently overlooked for leadership roles. Salaries, too, reflected a gap. Andrea, for example, earned significantly less than some of her white male peers who had joined the company after her, despite having equal or fewer responsibilities. The numbers alone were damning, but Eric wasn't satisfied with just data. He needed to understand how this disparity had gone unnoticed for so long. That afternoon, he arranged a meeting with Titan Energy's Director of Human Resources. Linda Price was a veteran of the corporate world, a no-nonsense woman who had spent nearly 3 decades in HR. When she entered his office, she carried herself with the confidence of someone who had long mastered her domain. Eric gestured toward the chair across from him. "Sit." She did so, her expression neutral. "I've been reviewing some employee records," he began, keeping his tone measured. "I'd like you to explain something to me." He slid Andrea's file across the desk. Linda took a quick glance, then met his gaze with practiced professionalism. "She's a solid employee," Linda said. "Good work ethic. No major complaints." "Then why has she never been promoted?" Linda hesitated. "We have a structured advancement process. Not everyone moves up at the same pace." Eric leaned forward. "She's been with us for 4 years. She's trained new employees, some of whom have been promoted over her. She ranks in the top tier of performance reviews. So I'll ask again, why has she never been promoted?" Linda exhaled, clearly weighing her words. "Sometimes employees aren't seen as leadership material. It's not just about numbers. It's about presence, confidence, the ability to command a room." Eric kept his expression impassive, though he felt a flicker of irritation. "And who decides that?" "Their direct supervisors, department heads. The same department heads who have a track record of promoting men over women, white employees over people of color." Linda's posture stiffened. "If you're suggesting there's discrimination—" "I'm not suggesting," Eric interrupted. "I'm looking at the evidence." A brief silence filled the room. "I'll be blunt, Linda," he continued. "This is unacceptable. I built this company on the principle of reward and merit. If our hiring and promotion system is failing people like Andrea Carter, then it's failing Titan Energy." Linda's jaw tightened. "What exactly do you want me to do?" Eric tapped the folder. "I want a full audit of our employment and promotion practices. Every rejection, every salary discrepancy, every instance where someone was passed over for advancement. And I want explanations, not excuses." Linda nodded slowly. "Understood." But Eric wasn't done. He intended to dig deeper, to see firsthand how the system operated from within. And to do that, he needed more than just reports. He needed to watch it unfold in real time. That evening, as he left the office, he once again found himself at the gas station where Andrea worked. He parked a short distance away, observing from the shadows. She was there, as always, moving efficiently between tasks, her exhaustion well hidden behind routine. After the last rush of customers subsided, she stepped outside for a brief moment, sinking onto the bench near the entrance. This time, Eric noticed the way her fingers trembled as she checked her phone. He could only imagine what she was reading: an overdue bill, a medical update on her mother, a reminder of her financial limitations. He had seen enough. By morning, he had a new plan. Andrea Carter wasn't just another employee being overlooked. She was proof of something broken within Titan Energy. And if there was one thing Eric Lee never tolerated, it was failure, especially within his own company. Eric Lee had never believed in handouts. The world was not a fair place, and those who succeeded did so by making the right choices in the face of adversity. But he also knew that success was not always a simple equation of effort plus talent. The system itself could be an obstacle, an invisible force that determined who rose and who remained stuck. Andrea Carter had been caught in that system, and now Eric needed to know whether her loyalty was the product of principle or simple resignation. Was she staying at Titan Energy because she truly believed in the company, or because she had no better options? And more importantly, what would she do if the illusion of choice was suddenly presented to her? The test had to be carefully designed. It couldn't be too obvious, nor could it feel like a setup. Andrea had to believe that what was offered was real, that it was a genuine opportunity to change her life. If she was willing to betray Titan Energy, then she was not the person he hoped she was. If she refused, then she was someone worth investing in. The next morning, he made a call to Victoria Hall, his executive assistant. She had been with him for years, a woman whose sharp instincts and discretion made her invaluable. He explained what he needed, outlining the scenario down to the smallest details. By noon, the plan was in motion. That evening, Andrea finished her shift at Titan Energy's corporate office and made her way to the gas station as usual. The transition from office worker to station attendant was seamless, as if she had long accepted that this was her reality. She arrived a few minutes early, clocked in, and got to work. The flow of customers was steady but manageable, and she moved through her tasks with the same quiet efficiency that Eric had observed before. 2 hours into her shift, a black sedan pulled into the station. The driver stepped out, a woman in a tailored gray suit, her movements precise and assured. She walked into the store, scanning the shelves as if she were just another customer, before approaching the counter where Andrea stood. Victoria had played many roles over the years: negotiator, strategist, problem solver, but tonight, she was playing the part of a senior recruiter for X-Fuel Corp., one of Titan Energy's top competitors. "Andrea Carter?" she asked, her tone professional but warm. Andrea glanced up from the register, surprised. "Yes?" Victoria smiled, pulling a sleek black folder from her bag. "My name is Olivia Grant. I'm with X-Fuel Corp. We've been reviewing industry performance data, and your name came up more than once. I'd like to talk to you about an opportunity." Andrea blinked, caught off guard. An opportunity? Victoria nodded. A job, a real one, with better pay, better benefits, and a position that matches your skills. Andrea hesitated, glancing around as if expecting someone to jump out and tell her this was a mistake. "I'm at work right now," she said cautiously. "Of course," Victoria replied smoothly. "I won't take much of your time, but I think you'll want to hear what I have to say." She placed the folder on the counter and slid it toward Andrea. Inside was an offer, 70% more than Andrea's current salary, full medical benefits that would cover her mother's care, and a flexible schedule to accommodate her pregnancy. On paper, it was everything she needed, everything she had been working toward but had never been given. Andrea's fingers brushed the folder, but she didn't open it. "I don't have a degree," she said. "We value experience over credentials," Victoria assured her. "Your work at Titan Energy has been outstanding. Your efficiency, problem-solving skills, and leadership qualities speak for themselves." Andrea looked down at the folder again. The numbers on the cover page might as well have been written in another language. They were foreign to her, too good to be real. "There is one condition," Victoria added, her tone casual but firm. "We need someone who can help us understand Titan Energy's internal systems. Nothing major, just a bit of insight, things you probably know without even thinking about. Call it an industry trade-off." Andrea finally looked up. "You want me to give you information about my company?" Victoria tilted her head slightly. "It's nothing unethical, just an understanding of how things operate. Your perspective would be valuable to us, but I need an answer soon. This opportunity won't be available if you wait." Silence stretched between them. Andrea exhaled slowly, her fingers curling away from the folder. She glanced around the store again as if trying to ground herself. "I appreciate the offer," she said finally, her voice quiet but firm. "But I can't leave Titan Energy like this." Victoria's expression remained neutral, but Eric, watching from a distance, noted the small flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. Andrea pushed the folder back. "They took a chance on me when no one else would. Even if they don't see me the way I want them to, they still gave me an opportunity. And I won't trade that for money." Victoria nodded as if she had expected this answer. "Understood." She picked up the folder, gave Andrea a polite smile, and left the store without another word. Andrea stood there for a moment, her hands resting on the counter, her heart pounding. Outside, in the shadows of the parking lot, Eric Lee closed his phone. She had passed the first test, but he wasn't done yet. The next 24 hours would determine everything. The morning after Andrea Carter turned down the offer from X Fuel Corp., she arrived at Titan Energy's headquarters feeling the same as she always did. Tired but determined. She had gotten home just after sunrise, managed a few hours of sleep, and forced herself awake to start another day in the office. This was her life, a constant rotation of exhaustion and responsibility, but there was no other choice. She had never thought much about the idea of loyalty. Loyalty to a company seemed like something only executives preached when they needed employees to work harder for less. But as she sat at her desk, reviewing data reports and sipping the cheap coffee from the break room, she found herself wondering if she had made the right decision the night before. The ex-fuel recruiter had offered her more money than she had ever dreamed of making. Enough to move her out of her small apartment, enough to pay for her mother's care without worrying about hospital bills stacking up, enough to prepare for the baby that would soon arrive. And yet, she had refused. There was no logic to it. She had told herself that Titan Energy had given her a chance when no one else had, that she owed them something for the opportunity. But the truth was, they had never truly seen her. She had worked hard for years, proving herself over and over again, and all it had earned her was stagnation. Promotions were given to others, raises barely kept up with inflation, and she was still stuck in the same cubicle she had occupied since her first day. So why had she said no? She didn't have an answer, only the gnawing uncertainty in the pit of her stomach. At precisely 10:15 a.m., an email notification appeared on her screen. Urgent. Please report to Executive Suite 1500 immediately. Her fingers hesitated over the keyboard. The sender was HR. She reread the message 3 times, as if expecting the words to change. No explanation, no context, just a direct order to report to a floor she had never stepped foot on. Panic crept in. Had someone found out about last night? Had the recruiter reported her conversation to someone at Titan Energy? Was she about to be fired? Taking a deep breath, she forced herself to stand. This was it. The moment everything collapsed. If she was being let go, she would have to find another job quickly, maybe a third one to make up for the lost income. Maybe X-Fuel would still be interested, though she doubted they would after she had rejected them so directly. She smoothed her blouse, squared her shoulders, and walked toward the elevator. The 15th floor was nothing like the part of the building she worked in. The ceilings were higher, the lighting softer, the air subtly perfumed with something expensive. Every surface gleamed. Polished glass, brushed steel, dark wood. She felt like an intruder in a place she had no right to be. A receptionist greeted her with a practiced smile and gestured toward a set of double doors at the end of the corridor. "They're expecting you," she said. Andrea nodded and forced her feet to move forward. The doors opened into a vast conference room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. At the head of the long table sat a man she recognized immediately, though she had only ever seen him in photographs. Eric Lee, CEO, billionaire, the face of Titan Energy, and sitting beside him, dressed in the same crisp suit from the night before, was the recruiter from X-Fuel. Andrea's breath caught in her throat. The recruiter, Olivia Grant, she had called herself, now wore a Titan Energy Executive ID badge. Her name wasn't Olivia. It was Victoria Hall, and she didn't work for X-Fuel. She worked for him. Andrea felt the floor shift beneath her feet. The job offer had been a test. Eric gestured to the seat across from him. "Sit down, Miss Carter." Andrea moved stiffly, lowering herself into the chair, every muscle in her body tense. "I imagine you have a lot of questions," Eric continued, his tone calm, measured. Andrea clenched her hands together in her lap. "Was any of it real?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "The job offer?" He shook his head. "No, but the choice was." She exhaled slowly, forcing herself to remain composed, though a storm raged inside her. "I needed to know something," Eric continued, "something that no report or performance review could tell me." He leaned forward slightly. "I needed to know what you would do when faced with an easy way out." Andrea swallowed hard. "And what did you find out?" He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "That you have integrity," he said finally. "That you don't betray the people you work for, even when they don't treat you the way they should. That you value something beyond a paycheck." Andrea shook her head, frustration rising to the surface. "Titan Energy has never valued me. They've kept me in the same position for years while I watched others move past me. I work harder than half the people in my department, and I'm still earning less than someone who started last year." Eric nodded, as if he had expected that response. "I know, and that's why you're here." He slid a folder across the table. Andrea hesitated before picking it up. Her eyes scanned the top page, and for a moment, she didn't understand what she was reading. Her name was printed at the top, but the position listed beneath it was not her current role: Director of Employee Equity and Development. She blinked, her brain struggling to process the words. "I don't understand," she said finally. Eric leaned back in his chair. "You should have been promoted years ago, and if our system had been fair, you would have been. But it wasn't, and that's something I intend to fix." Andrea felt her pulse hammering in her ears. "This isn't charity," he continued. "You've earned this, and now I'm asking you to help me make sure no one else has to fight the way you did just to be seen." Andrea turned the page, scanning the details. The salary was triple what she was making now, full benefits, including a medical plan that would cover her mother's treatments, a corporate apartment. She wouldn't have to worry about rent anymore. She looked back up at Eric. "Why me?" He smiled slightly. "Because you didn't take the easy way out, and that tells me you're exactly the kind of leader this company needs." Andrea let out a slow, shaky breath. For the first time in years, she wasn't fighting just to survive. She was being given the chance to change things, and she wasn't going to waste it. Andrea Carter stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows of her new office, watching the city below. It had been a long time since she had taken a moment just to stop and breathe. For years, she had moved through her days in a haze of exhaustion, always rushing from one obligation to the next, always calculating how much she needed to work to stay afloat. Now, for the first time in her life, she wasn't scrambling just to survive. Behind her, the office was still mostly bare. The furniture was sleek and modern, but it lacked the personal touches that came with time. The desk was clean, aside from the thick folders stacked neatly in the corner, filled with reports on pay discrepancies, promotion statistics, and hiring practices, documents that painted an unflattering picture of the company she had served for years. It had been a week since she accepted the position. 7 days of stepping into a world that had once been inaccessible to her. The first few days had been a blur, meeting department heads, reviewing policies, sitting in on executive meetings where decisions that shaped the lives of thousands were made in a matter of minutes. Eric Lee had wasted no time integrating her into the company's leadership. He had given her the title, the salary, and the authority, but he had also given her something more: responsibility. The role of Director of Employee Equity and Development wasn't just a gesture. It came with real power, real expectations, and she intended to live up to them. She turned from the window and sat down at her desk, opening the first report. The numbers were stark. The trends that Eric had uncovered in his investigation were even worse when viewed in detail. Women in the company advanced at half the rate of their male counterparts. Employees of color were routinely overlooked for promotions despite outperforming their peers. And the pay gaps, Andrea had suspected disparities, but seeing them in hard data was sobering. Her own story had been one of many. She had a plan, but change wouldn't happen overnight. People who had benefited from the system as it was would resist, and some of those people were in positions of power. She had already felt the weight of their scrutiny in meetings, the way certain executives spoke to her with polite condescension, as if waiting for her to fail. She would not give them that satisfaction. At precisely 9 a.m., a knock on her office door signaled the arrival of her first meeting of the day. Victoria Hall entered, carrying a tablet in one hand and a cup of coffee in the other. "You're making people nervous," she said without preamble, setting the coffee down on Andrea's desk. Andrea raised an eyebrow. That didn't take long. Victoria smirked. The old guard isn't thrilled about having someone looking over their shoulders, especially someone who doesn't owe them anything. Andrea picked up the coffee and took a sip. She had grown to appreciate Victoria's bluntness over the past week. "I'm not here to make them comfortable. That much is obvious." Victoria sat down across from her. "Eric wants an update on your first initiatives." Andrea had spent the past few days outlining immediate changes that could be implemented without months of bureaucratic delays. The first was a comprehensive salary audit. Every department would be required to submit pay data for review, and any unjustified discrepancies would have to be corrected. Next was the overhaul of the promotion process. Subjective criteria like leadership presence and cultural fit would no longer be acceptable justifications for rejecting a qualified candidate. Performance would be measured by results, not by how well someone fit into the existing executive mold. The final step, one that would take the longest, was restructuring Titan Energy's talent development programs. Andrea was creating a mentorship initiative that paired employees from underrepresented backgrounds with senior executives, ensuring that knowledge, opportunities, and networks were no longer reserved for an exclusive few. She laid it all out for Victoria, who listened without interruption. When Andrea finished, Victoria nodded approvingly. "It's ambitious, but if anyone can make it happen, it's you." Andrea appreciated the vote of confidence, but she knew that planning change and implementing it were two different things. By the afternoon, her inbox was already flooded with resistance. Emails from department heads questioning the necessity of the salary audit. Concerns about whether the new promotion guidelines would lower the company's hiring standards. Thinly veiled complaints about whether Titan Energy was becoming too focused on diversity. She expected it. She was ready for it. But what she wasn't expecting was the message that arrived just as she was about to leave for the day. A simple email, no subject line, from an employee she had never met. "Miss Carter, I heard about the changes you're making. I don't know if it will matter, but I just wanted to say thank you. I've been with this company for 6 years, and until now I never thought I'd have a real chance to move up. For the first time, I do." Andrea stared at the screen for a long moment. It mattered. It was a beginning, and she wasn't stopping anytime soon. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to subscribe for more. Don't forget to check out our other videos for more inspiring stories, and share this video with your friends so they can enjoy it too.